You're listening to Travel Tales with Fergal.
Hello, my name is Fergal O'Keeffe and you're very welcome to the podcast. I have a very special guest today, Dermot Cosgrove from Ennis, County Clare, my own hometown, who joined the mythical group, the French Foreign Legion, back in the late 80s into the early 90s. He was there through the Gulf War and Somalia and many other conflict zones, and since then he's worked in private security throughout many conflict zones through the Middle East and Africa. So we have a great chat today about that whole thing about joining the Foreign Legion, what it was like and what's it like being in a conflict zone, what's it like being in a firefight, the training, what's it like working for private security firms in Africa and in the Middle East. Really is a fascinating character. He's a guest that I've wanted to have since before I did any of seasons of Travel Tales with Fergal. So I'm delighted to say I eventually have him today and we get to hear his life story really, and what an amazing story it is. I grew up reading stories about the French Foreign Legion, and they were the first adventure stories I suppose I grew up reading, so I've always been fascinated, and if like me you found those stories fascinating, I think they really are the true adventurers, then I think you'll really enjoy this episode. So let's go straight into it now. Dermot, you're very welcome to the podcast. Great to see a fellow Clare man, a fellow Ennis man.
Thanks very much, Fergal.
This is season 6 now, and you've been on my list since before season 1, and the reason for that is because I remember back in the 80s, you're from Ennis, I'm from Ennis, and I remember hearing about you going off to the Foreign Legion, and I remember one Christmas, in my head it was snowy, you ran past me in little shorts and a t-shirt at Christmas time.
Yeah, that's when the 80s, when, as my mother keeps telling people, I ran away from home to join the Foreign Legion.
Exactly.
She's still sticking with that story.
But that's the romantic, I kind of grew up with that. That's the kind of romantic story. And it's funny, I was talking to a couple of people earlier on for another podcast, and they're in their 20s, and I said I was going to interview a guy who was in the Foreign Legion, and they were looking at me blankly. And one of the girls says, "Oh yeah, my dad would love that," and I was kind of going, that's probably a generational thing. But I'm sure I'm interested to see, did you grow up with that? Because I grew up with all those stories about the Foreign Legion, and they were mythical.
Yeah, I think the first time that I had any kind of awareness of real awareness of the Foreign Legion was I'd gone across to England. My sister was living over there, and I'd gone across her for a couple of weeks in the summer, and she'd gone out with her husband, and I was babysitting my niece. And there was a documentary on, I think it was BBC, about the French Foreign Legion, and it was being kind of narrated and and introduced by Simon Murray, who probably wrote the first of the real kind of memoirs of the Foreign Legion. So I was there. I was sitting there, age 12, looking at this and kind of going, "Wow, that's something." Especially coming from kind of a family that had a military background. Kind of my granduncles, my grandfather, kind of my uncles, all on my mum's side, and then my brother had enlisted kind of when I was only a kid, and he was 17. So the military was always something I was aware of, and kind of family military history and stuff like that. And then seeing this on TV, then it was kind of, wow, these guys are pretty hard. And then it kind of, I suppose I won't say it was kind of put on the shelf after that. I was always a really avid reader, so I would haunt the public library in Ennis, and came across a book by a guy, Rolf Steiner, who was a German who'd enlisted in the Foreign Legion, as he describes himself, a mercenary of conscience afterwards. So he fought in Biafra for really no pay, and he fought in Sudan where he didn't get paid. It was just he fought for the rebel groups against the bigger kind of the military juntas, and devoured that book, and kind of I suppose the seed was really kind of planted that in that from that book on, that this is something I think about. And I went through school and kind of finished secondary school in Flannans in '87, and just I was kind of sick of school, and can't say I totally enjoyed kind of my secondary school years. My secondary school years, kind of I wrapped myself up in sport, playing rugby and long distance running, and I didn't really want to go to college, but I didn't really know kind of what I wanted to do either. So I ended up going to college for a year, and while I was there was a guy in the same class as me who was talking about joining the Foreign Legion. And then there was another guy that I bumped into. His brother was in the Legion and was back in Limerick on leave. And I got talking to him, and he said, "So you're thinking of joining?" And I said, "Well, I am, yeah." And he said, "Well, look, this is the story. This is the real story. This is the no romance, nothing. It's mentally very tough. It's physically very, very tough, but mentally as well, it's very tough. And you're not going to become Jean-Claude Van Damme as soon as you hit basic training," which is the misconception so many guys have. They think they're joining, they're going to become instant super soldiers, and don't realize that military life includes clean toilets. So I got the low down on it, and then kind of was supposed to go back to college after the summer for the second year, but I had everything planned kind of to go to France. So I jumped on the train down to Rosslare and got the ferry across to France and hitchhiked my way to a recruiting station. And next thing, that was the next 6 years of my life.
And where was that? Where did you go to, Paris, or where did you go to?
Well, the funny thing was I had schoolboy French. And of course, with having a Clare accent and schoolboy French, I wasn't the easiest to understand. So I got as far as Paris. I stopped a gendarme in the street and tried to explain I was looking for the Fort de Nogent recruiting base. And he didn't have a clue what I was saying. And he just kind of told me, off you go, keep walking. So I slept rough in Paris for a few days while I kind of gathered kind of what I was going to do next. And I had enough money in my pocket for a train fare to Lille. Normally I would have gone to Marseille, where the Legion is based just outside of Marseille, but I didn't have enough money for the train fare. And I think I had about 20 quid left. So I had enough for a baguette and a lump of cheese and a train fare to Lille. And I got to Lille and managed to follow the signs kind of to the military base, where I knew there was a Legion recruitment post inside it. And I arrived there and kind of knocked on the door and said, "Right, I want to enlist." And that was kind of the start, and I was there for 3 days before they shipped me down to Paris, and then in Paris overnight before we were all brought down to Auban, just outside of Marseille, which is the headquarters of the Legion, and it's the intake centre for recruits.
So that's where you went to then for your training into Pyrenees?
Yeah, it was in Castelnaudary, which is kind of on the foothills of it's kind of on the downslopes of the Pyrenees, but we spent quite a lot of time in the Pyrenees training because we had a lot of forced marches to do and long distance marches to train on, and shooting ranges and stuff like that we went to. And then when I finished basic training, depending on where you're ranked, you get a chance to put down your 3 choices of regiment you want to go to. And I'd been strongly encouraged by a couple of the corporals who were my instructors to go to their regiment, which was the 2nd Infantry Regiment, which is based in Nîmes. So I asked to go to Nîmes, and I got my choice, and arrived in Nîmes, got off the bus, and they had us all lined up to meet the regimental CO, and they kind of asked for volunteers to go to the Support Weapons Company, which had a reconnaissance anti-tank element, and I volunteered for that. And it was more interesting than basic infantry training because we got to do kind of quite a lot more kind of going around the place and spent a lot of time. We were a unit that were very kind of physically active, kind of sport wise as well, which I was delighted with.
For you, it's a 5-year contract you sign, isn't it?
It's a 5-year contract, but I had 3.5 years done when they offered me a 2-year posting. And when that happens, because it has the Legion has a rule for medical purposes that when you come back to France after doing 2 years, that you have to be at least 6 months in France just in case you're medically ill and you need to spend time in hospital and stuff like that, they factor in kind of a 6 month. Well, you get 3 months leave out of that. So you have about 3 months at the end of it, kind of for just in case there's any medical complications and for processing you out if you do decide to leave. So I had to sign an extra year. So I actually did 6 years.
Is that the normal amount of time, or do some people stay on?
The average is kind of 5 years. Like the vast majority of guys will do 5 years. There's quite a lot of lads, and I know quite a lot of lads who would do between 17 and 20 years.
Wow.
Kind of if you get over kind of the 8 year period, then you may as well do the whole lot. And there's quite a lot of lads quite a lot of Irish lads who are they're now retired from the Legion, having done 20 years. So it's not uncommon.
And what's it like with all those different nationalities? Like, where people there, the old like the movies back in the day, it was always guys who were, lost love or on the run, or, you know what I mean? That was the romantic ideal.
Yeah, you do get the guys who have a bad breakup and enlist. They tend not to, because when you enlist, you've got a kind of a 3 to 4 week period of vetting that goes on. So you do your medical, you do your psychological test. Contrary to popular belief, Legionnaires are not madmen. They're actually they're quite strictly psychologically vetted, and the IQ tends to be higher in the Legion than quite a lot of units. But you do kind of your background check and stuff like that. But I mean, I remember when I enlisted, there was 2 Swedish lads who'd been on holidays in France with their girlfriends, and both broke up with the girls at the same time and enlisted. And kind of after about a week in the recruit center, they kind of went, "Oh, yeah, this might have been a bad idea."
Yeah.
So, guys like that are just the Legion isn't going to waste their time with people like that. So you have kind of your right up until the end of basic training to say, put your hand up and go, "Yeah, I don't like this. I want to get out," and you get processed out. Because they don't want to waste they don't want to waste money on training guys who are going to do 6-8 months and then suddenly try and desert, and just cause headaches for everybody.
And what was the attitude to French people, to the Foreign Legion?
There's quite a lot of French in the Legion. I mean, contrary to kind of the name, you do have French guys in the Legion. No, one of the rules of the Legion is that the French can't join. So when they do enlist, they automatically have to have their identity changed. So they change their name and they change their nationality on their ID papers. So they go from French to being Belgian, or from Canada, or kind of French-speaking countries, and that's how they kind of wiggle around the problem. The Legion is very good at wiggling around problems, so it is. So that's how they get around that.
But just say you didn't have to change your name. I thought everyone had a new identity.
No. If you have, because the Legion doesn't just take anyone. You can have a criminal background, or you can be wanted for a crime, but it's not every crime. I mean, the crimes that guys have committed that enlist are very much kind of misdemeanors more than anything else. Kind of guys who've defaulted on loans, or defaulted on their mortgage, or stuff like that wouldn't there was a time, of course, when you had everything. You had murderers and rapists and bank robbers and the whole lot. Those days are like long gone. They just don't want those. If you still have an outstanding warrant, then you have to have your identity changed. Now, I was offered the choice if I wanted my identity changed, and I went, no. It's not a problem for me. And they said, okay, so if your family come looking for you, it's okay. And I went, yeah, absolutely. They've probably figured it out by now. I'd sent a letter home just after I got to France. So I said, they pretty much know where I am by now anyway. So That's fine. Now the funny thing was, my mother started contacting the French embassy and the whole lot after I enlisted and stuff. And you're not allowed to receive any post, any mail during your first month or so while you're in the Legion. So I was on guard duty in Castleknock one very cold December day, and next thing I got called in, I was told report to the military police office, and I went, Jesus, what's after happening now? And I walked in, and the military police officer sat there, and he showed me a card, and he went, "What's this?" And I looked at it, and I recognized the handwriting being my mother's. She'd somehow managed to get the address, and I went, "That's my mother." And he went, "How did she find you?" And I said, "Look, she's better than in terms of security in the Legion." So he kind of laughed, but he did give me a clout across the ear as well.
Wow.
I mean, when I enlisted, there was still an era there. We were coming out of an era where there was, punishment was harsh.
So I thought, when you said that, I thought you meant Tourette, like not literally, actually.
Oh no, physically, I got a slap across in the side of the head.
Geez, that's bad.
Yeah, I mean, nowadays, kind of physical punishment it won't say it's not there. There is physical punishment, as in kind of units are kind of med do kind of push-ups and press-ups and stuff like that. But I was in that middle ground of the old Legion coming into the new Legion, when you still had, there was still physical punishment, as in, you got a punch in the mouth for something. It wasn't unusual, and you had a physical punishment, which in French is known as the plow, which is basically putting a rucksack on a guy's back full of rocks and making him run and run and run. Now, there was a time when the straps in the rucksack were made of wire, rather than actual straps, but they would push you to exhaustion.
And was that like basic training?
Yeah.
Like, was there parts of it where you were going, I'm not going to get out of this live?
The first 3 months, I regularly kind of said to myself, what the hell am I after doing? Now, I suppose it got easier once we were allowed to write home and stuff like that. But, there was periods there when I went like, Jesus, what am I after doing? It's...
Do those runs like you were doing, like, is it 120 Ks you have to do? Is it in 3 days?
After 4 weeks, you have to earn your Kepi Blanc, your hat, which is a 120-kilometer forced march with full gear. So you do that in kind of 2.5 days, depending on units. Like, some units did it in 3 days. We had a bit of a monster in the hills, as a platoon commander running basic training, and it was his first unit in basic training, so he was out to make a name for himself. We did it in kind of 2.5 days.
Because we talk about it in a bit, but you kind of do it for fun now. Do you know what I mean?
Well, this is the mad thing, is I do it for fun now.
So, but at the time, did you love it? Did you love the buzz?
I suppose you always complain about it, but kind of I did enjoy it. Like, I did enjoy the physical effort. I did enjoy pushing myself, and part of the reason of enlisting in the Legion was to actually challenge myself, to see, could I do something like this. And by the time I finished basic training, I got to my unit, and I finished advanced training as part of the reconnaissance unit. I absolutely loved it. Like, after finishing the day's kind of work, I was going on 10, 12 mile runs kind of with the lads, or we were sitting in the room. We were kind of a unit that kind of everyone left alone. We were kind of alone to ourselves in many ways, and like, we had bench presses and stuff like that in the rooms when we shouldn't have had, and stuff. We'd throw kind of a curtain over it when there was a room inspection, just to hide it. But I loved the physicality of it.
And when you were a teenager and you were going there, and I'm sure you had a romantic ideal, like, how did it compare to when you actually went through it?
Oh, even with being told what it was like, it was nothing like what I was told either, because it was just a massive shock to the system. Like it, I the first night in basic training, kind of we travelled down by train. We travelled from Marseille across to Castelnaudary by train, and then by bus as far as the barracks, and got sent off to our rooms, being shouted at by the drill instructors and the whole lot. We headed into our rooms, and they said, right, start unpacking your gear, and it's got to be folded in a perfect square, 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters. And you're doing that, putting it into your lockers. And at the same time, you got drill instructors running around the place shouting at you. One of them said something to me, and I went, sorry, but I said it in English, so I got a punch in the mouth, and was reminded that there was speaking English had stopped. No, it was all French, but it was done on the end of a punch in the mouth. There was that kind of stuff. So it was a complete another shock to the system. Like, it's nothing compared to kind of what you expect. I mean, I met a guy from he was up from kind of Doolin direction a few years ago, and he'd gone across to join the Legion. And I don't know how he got my name, but he got in touch. He got in touch with me, and he said that he'd done 4 months basic training and left because he was really disappointed with how it was. So I messaged him back and I went, well, what were you expecting? And he was kind of going, well, there was no real soldiering. And I said, but you don't even know what soldiering is. So soldiering isn't kind of, they've got to train you from being a civilian to training you to be a soldier. Which one, you're not going to do in 4 months. So they're just trying to get you into the mentality and the regime of, kind of a strict kind of reality that you get up in the morning, you stand by your bed until someone comes and counts you off on a sheet, that you have curfews and that you have lights out and that you have jobs to do, like clean toilets, that there is no one else to do it, and that you have to iron uniforms, and you've got guard duty, and it's not all kind of, oh yeah, I'm here now, I've signed on the dotted line. Why am I jumping on a plane and kind of doing hand-to-hand combat? It's just that just doesn't exist. So he said, I was really disappointed, and I went, well, you don't even know what you were disappointed in. Like, I knew that was part of the reality of becoming a soldier, was barracks life and learning about being in the barracks and going on exercise and stuff like that, and it's not always enjoyable. In fact, it's probably 90% not enjoyable, 10% kind of a buzz when something does happen.
Of course. You were there around the time of the Gulf War, weren't you?
Yeah, I had come home on leave for a couple of weeks and for 3 weeks in the summer, in August of 1990, and I'd gone over to May Carney's pub because a friend of mine, his younger brother, was the bar manager over there. And I said, I'll go over and see Shane, have a pint with him while he's there behind the bar, and we'll go for a couple of pints afterwards. I was watching TV, and of course RT News came on, and next thing, Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait. There's going to be repercussions over this. Like, they're not going to let him away with this. And I went home, and the following day I phoned up, just out of interest, I phoned up my barracks and phoned up my CO. And the first thing he said to me was, where are you? And I went, I'm in Ireland. I wasn't supposed to be in Ireland because you don't get leave to come. You have to get special permission to go home. And I didn't, but there was ways and means of getting home. And I'd come home for the 3 weeks, and he said, where are you? I said, well, I'm in Ireland. And he said, are you coming back? I said, yeah, of course I am, obviously. I said, is this kicking off? And he went, it's unofficial as yet. We're going, but finish your leave. And when you get back, we'll be kicking up a gear. And I think I went back kind of a day early or a couple of days early, and walked in the gate, and vehicles were being painted to desert camouflage and stuff like that from European camouflage, and this is going. So it still took a kind of a couple of weeks. We were sitting around kind of going, yeah, we're ready now. Let's get after it. And so a couple of weeks later, we were all sent down and put on a ship going from France to Saudi Arabia. And then that was the kind of start of it. And we pushed up to just short of the Iraqi border. And we were there and we ran reconnaissance. Well, my unit was running reconnaissance missions, kind of along intelligence gathering missions, kind of along the border, kind of the border zone, kind of from the very start until it came into the air war started, kind of, and then in February of '91, the ground war started, and we pushed across into Iraq. So it was a very short-lived thing. I mean, it was only kind of 4 days of a. Yeah. He'd been that Iraq had been that pummeled by the coalition air forces that 4 days after we got in there, there'd been some shooting and stuff like that. There'd been a couple of battles, and basically the Iraqis kind of went, yeah, we're not going to be able to take this on. They pulled back, and of course the mandate was only to of the mission was only to push to the Tigris River and stop. So we stopped there, and that was the end. That was the end of it. And within 2-3 weeks, we were on the ship going home.
And were you working with other countries then, like Americans and stuff?
I spent, we worked with the Americans. We worked with some of we actually fell under command of the 82nd Airborne for the final phase of the mission. And we had, we were, I remember coming back from the border one night after reconnaissance, where there'd been a firefight, and kind of the fire support from U.S. Army artillery kind of started firing over our heads, kind of to give us covering fire. There was quite a lot of Irish lads there with the U.S. forces. There was lads who'd emigrated to the States and had joined, and I met a few of them, and there was you'd meet kind of, in a way, a bit like the Foreign Legion. You'd meet lads from kind of all walks of life and backgrounds. But then I came back to France and I did a couple of training courses, and I was offered a 2-year posting in Djibouti, and out of that 2 years, 9 months I spent in Somalia.
Where is that? That's Eastern Africa, is it? Or?
Yeah, so you've got the Horn of Africa, and it's a tiny little country. I mean, it's I think it's a little bigger than Munster, really. Yeah. But it's a desert country, and there's really only one main city in it, the city of Djibouti itself. But it's sandwiched between Somalia and Ethiopia. It's a strategic position on the mouth of the Red Sea. It's a choke point there, so it was very strategically important. It's regionally kind of where it is with Somalia and Ethiopia. Kind of, it was very important there as well. Just before I got there, civil war had kicked off between the two tribes in the country. The French brokered a ceasefire, and kind of from day one, we were doing ceasefire observation missions. So we'd spend 2 weeks in the field, living on top of hills and tents, kind of keeping an eye on what the ground situation was, and then spending 2 weeks in barracks, kind of getting your gear more or less ready to go back out again. We were a unit that were constantly on alert because of regionally where we were. We were an alert unit, and we were just told, grab your gear and start getting ready. We're going to Somalia.
So what was that like, Somalia? That was peak time, or
it was peak. It was it was all down the UN mission. The first UN mission was a peace enforcement mission, so it was basically going in with a big stick. It wasn't to talk to anyone; it was to enforce the peace and get the aid convoys going out, out of Mogadishu, out into the countryside where it was needed, and kind of preventing the warlords from stealing the stuff. And it was down to Mary Robinson, really. She was the one who badgered the United Nations into kind of declaring a mission. Fair dues to her. Like, she didn't take no for an answer when she saw what was going on there, which was basically a genocide.
Yeah.
There was 300,000 people had died in the country at the time from conflict and starvation. So we landed in Mogadishu. We were a couple of days in Mogadishu, and we got tasked to head north, head up the country, and push out as far as the Ethiopian border, where we were starting anti-bandit operations. So we're basically trying to hit the bandits who were raiding the food convoys, and hitting the refugee convoys as well. So I got to work alongside the Americans quite a lot, which was great. I mean, we were there kind of a week, and we were pushing out towards the border, and got into a village, and there's a lot of white guys kind of sitting around the building. And we're going like, who the hell are these guys? I got over there, and it was a Green Beret unit, and they were going like, who are you lads? Who are you lads? We're going, Legion. So no one told us you were coming. I said, well, no one told us you were even here. They were doing reconnaissance for preparing an airstrip so that aid flights could actually get in and land kind of in remote Ethiopia or remote Djibouti.
Are we under attack then there?
We got into several firefights with the with bandits, because we had the French Army Air Corps would fly missions where they'd locate kind of bandit units, technicals kind of operating, which would operate out kind of in that border region with Ethiopia, which was very lawless. And they would kind of drive in these Mad Max type vehicles to attack aid convoys. So we were posted up kind of in different positions along the border. There was my unit and a couple more units, and we'd get our intelligence from the Army Air Corps and guide us to positions where we'd set up ambushes, or we'd actually kind of go after them, kind of chase them.
And what was that like?
We were 25 guys living out of what was an old Italian, because Somalia had been an Italian colony at one point. And they built all these little stone towers kind of along the borders with Ethiopia and stuff. And there was 25 of us living out of this old stone tower in the middle of the bush. So if we were as vulnerable as, I mean, the only thing we had was that we could call on air support, but we were as vulnerable as anyone out there if we come under attack, because some of these bandits, these technical vehicles had heavy machine guns on the back of them, so they could lay down quite heavy fire.
What's that like, being in a firefight?
You don't think about it at the time.
Like all I'm thinking is Black Hawk Down, that movie, and it looks so intense.
Yeah.
Did that capture it well, that movie?
It did. Yeah, it did. Yeah, I mean, I landed on my second tour of Somalia, which was a peacekeeping mission. We got there kind of, I think it was a week after Black Hawk Down happened.
So it's tense then.
It was extremely tense. And we were responsible for a new area, and we had a new mission, which was peacekeeping as such. But my unit were basically, we'd switched to cordon search operations to try and capture weapons, and we were doing convoy escort missions as well between where we were back down to Mogadishu. So we were ambushed on several occasions, kind of on the road by militants, and on one occasion we were kind of informed at the last minute that Boutros-Ghali, the General Secretary of the UN, was coming to town. He'd been invited by GOAL, the Irish agency, to see one of their projects, which was an orphanage in Baidoa. Now, unfortunately for Boutros-Ghali, quite a lot of the employees of GOAL were actually working as well for Mohammed Farah Aidid, one of the warlords. So before he touched down, they knew about it, and there was a lot of trouble started in town. There were several firefights. There was a firefight around the orphanage that we were in as well, and it all kind of kicked off until kind of he was escorted back out to the airfield in our camp and flown out of there.
What's it like being in a firefight?
Well, it's a bit hard to describe. It tends to, like, in the contacts we had in Somalia were very much kind of, we went out to lay out ambushes on bandits who were trying to attack aid convoys and stuff like that. And they were generally kind of spotted beforehand by French Air Corps helicopters. So we'd get in position before kind of, or normally if we could get in position kind of well before they came by. But it's kind of different to explain, because everything goes from 0 to 100. Next thing there's whizzes and crackles and stuff like that going off, and there's popping going off because certain types of rifle make a certain type of sound. And you've got the crack of high velocity rounds as well coming. So if you, as it's always said, if you hear them, you're okay. It's when you don't hear it that's the one that's going to get you. So and along with that, if it's anyway dark, you've got tracer kind of going around the place, zipping around the place and stuff. And I'm sure people will be kind of familiar with that from seeing tracer from a lot of these movies and stuff. But if you can see something like that from afar, it's quite spectacular because it's a sound and light show. Being in the middle of it is extremely scary because you're trying to maintain control of guys. Like I had 3 guys under me, trying to direct them into the right place, trying to return fire if you were being fired upon, trying to keep it all together. And at the same time, you've got cracks and whizzes and, you've got tracer coming kind of over your head or at you. You don't really kind of get to process it until afterwards as to what's just happened. You just try and maintain a cool head during it, which is, I suppose the more it happens to you, the better chance you have of doing that. But, when the first time it ever happens to you it's scary as hell.
Are they able to prepare you for that, or is it only by being in it?
You can prepare guys so much so they're kind of aware of a lot of what's happening, but doing live fire exercises where you're firing over the heads of people and stuff like that, that's few and far between now because for safety reasons. And even when I was in the Legion, kind of, it was, you might get it on occasion, but not that often. You might get it overseas. When we did a lot of training on one of the ranges, where in Djibouti itself, where we would set off explosives at the same time as we advanced kind of down along the range and stuff, just to make it kind of as real as possible. But you're generally not having someone who's aggressively trying to kill you in those situations. So it's you can exercise all you want, but it's not going to be the same as the real deal when it actually does happen. If you're anywhere near rock or anything like that, you've got you can hear the ricochet coming off a rock, and it's kind of like it throws everything into it as well. It's like, where's that going? But it's a funny situation in a way. We were lucky. There was a couple of situations we were in where it was all gunfire. A few other lads that I know had RPGs fired at their vehicles and stuff, and one of the lads had a very close one. An Irish lad actually had a very close one when the RPG literally skipped across the road in front of him. The guy just fired under panic, and it could have gone kind of a couple of feet in the other direction. It would have come straight in the cab of the truck. We had gunfire. We had, kind of was AK-47 fire that we ended up dealing with. We didn't have any real heavy weapons fired at us, like light machine guns or heavy machine guns. So, it's you don't really kind of process it until afterwards. It's like what went on there, kind of, in a way. There's a saying that, no plan survives contact with the enemy. So whatever you had planned just goes out the window as soon as the first round goes out, and then you just try and stick to getting through it.
Did you ever have a hairy moment?
I've had a few hairy moments. One would have been, I suppose, not in Somalia. It was when I was a civilian and working in Iraq, when I was meeting up with a couple of guys before I left Baghdad, and a rocket came through a rocket was fired at the hotel building that we were in. Like a heavy rocket was fired at the hotel building, and it went into the floor just below us. So if it had been a couple of feet higher, it would have come straight into the room where we were at. We were all thrown to the floor. There was a big bang. Everything started coming down, and we were all thrown to the floor. But then kind of it was a head count to make sure everything was all right and get out into firing positions.
So your job, like those adrenaline rushes that you get then, how do you come down from that? Or is PTSD like a thing, or with you? Or?
It is, yeah. PTSD.
Imagine.
Is a thing. It's I've been shot at in Somalia. I've been shot at in Sudan. Iraq, Afghanistan as well. I was with a media crew in Afghanistan, and about 2 minutes after we left the one of the bases where we'd interviewed some military personnel, we were pretty much just gone out the door when the place was mortared. So they were contacting us to see if we were all right, and we were on the other side of it, thankfully. So we were good. But 5 minutes earlier, we would have been inside in the middle of a military base that was being hit. PTSD is a thing. I mean, I've gone and done my therapy and stuff like that. I've been through that, because it is necessary. It can sometimes take quite a while. I mean, you can come home and be sitting there and suddenly kind of go, shit, excuse my language, but so it's kind of processing, and so some events can hit you kind of afterwards, and it can be quite a while afterwards when they hit you. I mean, thankfully, I've always been pretty lucky kind of on all these, and I've had a few close ones, but none of them have been too close.
Did anyone? So the people that you're with during that operation, did everyone get through it?
I mean, touch wood, Somalia, we had a couple of kind of minor injuries, but we didn't have any fatalities.
Which is quite amazing, isn't it? Because you were literally bang in the middle of it.
Yeah, the Legion has a bit of a reputation with the Somalis. Back in '76, one of the Somali separatist groups raided into Djibouti, and they kidnapped a busload of school kids and expected kind of negotiation and stuff like that. The French government sent along a negotiator, and the Legion at the same time kind of went, yeah, okay, well, they can talk all they want, but no one's getting out of this. And like the response from the Legion was quite brutal, because they killed all the gunmen. Like, they weren't letting anyone get away, and they started a firefight with the Somali border post, and wiped that out as well. So they established kind of a precedent in that if it's wearing a green beret, don't mess with it, because you're going to get hit, and you're going to get we had orders. My regimental CO, when we landed on the UN mission where we were wearing blue berets, he told us to keep our green berets in the front pocket of our body armor, and that if it did kick off, we were to put on our green berets and respond like Legionnaires. Wow. Because he wasn't taking any casualties. Like, he was refusing to let guys just get shot at for UN rules. So it was like, if they want to take us on, they'll get taken on.
And would you have worked with other groups like the SAS or other special forces?
Not while I was in the Legion. I knew SAS guys since I've been a civilian. I've been around SAS units kind of since I've been a civilian. They're very capable of doing what they do. The same with units like the SBS. I've worked with some of these guys who were ex-SAS and ex-SBS in a professional capacity.
Like being an Irish guy going to Somalia and you've probably spent a lot of your life in that part of the world. Do you love it?
I left the Legion in '94, came back to Ireland, and just couldn't find a decent job. No one really wants to hire you with Legionnaire in your CV, so I ended up kind of working as a security guard in the supermarket and bouncing at the weekends, until a friend of mine who was still in the Legion came back from Bosnia, and handed me a business card and told me, he said, these lads in London are looking for ex-Legionnaires to go to Africa. And I went, do you know what the job is? And he went, no idea, but the money is supposed to be good. And I went, I've got to get out of here or I'll crack up. So, I've spent since '96, I've spent the vast majority of my life in Africa, and to a certain extent parts of the Middle East as well. I came back and worked in Ireland for a few years, and 9 to 5 in a suit is not my game.
And I presume that's probably the same for a lot of Legionnaires after they retire. It must be very hard.
With retirement in the Legion, lads are leaving lads are enlisting at 19, and they're kind of mid-30s, late 30s when, they've got a pension. So, they just go looking for work, and quite a lot of them ended up working in the security industry overseas, security contracting. And, they're back in Africa and they're earning a good wage as well. They're still at a, kind of a very functional age.
And what countries in Africa have you worked in then?
When I joined the British security firm, they were hiring for Algeria because Algeria was in the middle of civil war between the government and the radical Islamists, and they were contracted kind of to protect infrastructure sites and stuff like that for oil companies and stuff. So I started out. I spent the first 8 years kind of in Algeria, and then after 8 years, I kind of went, and I was lucky that I got to bounce around the entire country because it's the largest country in Africa, and it's very, very diverse. Tribally, languages, kind of, because you have the Berber languages and you have Arabic languages and stuff like that. But also kind of the terrain goes from fantastic mountains in the north, where prior to the Civil War, the people used to go skiing at the weekend in the winter. And then you can go from there right down into kind of several layers of the Sahara. So you have the huge, gigantic dunes kind of in the central Sahara, and it goes down then towards the borders with Mali and Niger and Mauritania, where you have these fantastic rock outcroppings in the Hagar. I suppose the easiest way to describe it is that if you've seen photographs of film of Utah, the way they have these huge rock pinnacles sticking out in the desert, it's exactly the same. Wow. So I spent 8 years bouncing all around Algeria. I got to see the whole place.
Is it stunning?
It's fantastic. Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. If they get to a point where tourism starts there again, they'll mop up because they can offer everything.
I always say, like any country, the French only went to great spots, like, you know what I mean? if the French colonize it, it's worth going there.
Yeah, I mean you have the mountains in the north and kind of these fantastic cork forests kind of in the north as well, and on a par with anything you'll see in the kind of the Pyrenees if you were to go hiking across and stuff like that. But and the people are fantastic as well. I mean, they're intensely welcoming people. Like they've been through a massive amount of trauma with the Civil War that was there, but yet
particularly, I think the Legionnaires, the first place they went to was Algeria, if I'm right.
Yeah, when the Legion was started, it was basically 1831 under King Charles X, and it was basically the colonization of Algeria.
So how do they, is there that history? Like, how do they
there is,
relate to
I mean, when I went there originally, we never told anyone we were ex-French Foreign Legion, because you still had a whole generation there that
it was the 60s
that had fought in the Civil War. 1954 to 1961 when the French left. So out of kind of respect, kind of more than anything else, you weren't going to say, "Oh, I was in the Legion." The Legion and the French were pretty brutal to the Algerian population, and it's something that still needs to be sorted out kind of politically as to kind of recognition that they were pretty brutal. Everyone kind of knew we were ex-legionnaires, like Irish guys pitching up in the middle of the desert speaking French. Come on, there's only one place we were going to pick up like that. We just didn't say it. No, I got around and I had a great time kind of being guided around, kind of going to different cities as part of the projects that was on, and being brought around to sites that were synonymous with the Legion. Like I've been to the headquarters of the Legion in Sidi Bel Abbès, near the western city of Oran. The Legion base there is a school for the gendarmerie in Algeria, but the original door is still there.
It's a beautiful old fort, is it?
Oh, it is, yeah. Yeah, it is, yeah. I mean, they've preserved some of the old forts kind of amazingly. Yeah. And I've been to some of the old desert bases in the Legion, which are perfectly preserved. I mean,
like where would they be?
Oh, you have a few spots kind of right down deep in the desert, which were patrol bases. And I've been over to kind of the close to the border with Morocco in Bashar. And you've got these old forts that are there that are still very well preserved, and they're very well preserved by the Algerians as part of the history. Kind of, they're very proud of the fact that a bit like the Irish, very proud of the fact that we kicked the English out. They're very proud of the fact that they kicked the French out. So they've kept these things as part of their history.
You can't really go there now, though, as a tourist, can't you? Not you have to have someone with you, or.
No, you need quite a bit of sponsorship to get into the country.
Oh, do you?
Yeah. Now, I actually saw a post from the US Embassy, the US ambassador in Algeria the other day, that they're looking at opening up a direct flight between Algeria and the US. And this is kind of the start of, I think, well, personally, and I hope it does happen, is the start of tourism opening up in the country, because it would be, there's a lot of misconceptions about the country and stuff like that, but it would be fantastic to see. And if they ever allow proper tourism back in Algeria, it'll be fantastic, because all along the north coast you have all these Roman ruins that are amazingly well preserved. Wow. So along with kind of the history, the French history and stuff like that, because you have some of the cities still have the old French architecture downtown and stuff. But alongside that, you have these fantastic Roman ruins, and then of course, kind of, if you get into the southern desert, you've got all the prehistoric stuff. Wow. But it looks like kind of they're allowing more organized tourism to go back into parts of the country as well. So, it was interesting to see, which would be absolutely fantastic for the place. Yeah. Because it deserves it.
Exactly.
They're extremely welcoming people. Like they've always been a fantastic people. So, it'd be great to see kind of the whole place kind of flourish from getting tourism.
And you live now in Kilkee and on the west coast.
I'm living in Kilkee. I've been on the job I'm on now in North Africa. I've been on for the last 10 years, and I work a month on, month off. So I'm kind of come home to Kilkee kind of on my month off, and my girlfriend lives in the States. So for the last while, I've been dividing my time as to getting across there as often as I can. I was also kind of going as well, like you're hitting your late 40s now, kind of, you need a bit of a challenge. Like, you're not going to sit here and get kind of old and decrepit. So I was watching a David Attenborough documentary, and because I do a lot of bird watching when I'm home, because it's a fantastic area for it. And I do spend quite a lot of time watching kind of geese that come into West Ayr. And next thing, I was watching this documentary, and they were showing barnacle geese in part of Greenland, and I went, "Wow, that would be an absolutely fantastic area to kind of walk into." And then, kind of, I took a look at Greenland on Google Earth and stuff like that, and kind of started kind of, doing a bit of research, and I ended up talking to an Welsh guy, who, as part of his own personal project, he helps track the migration of Greenland white-fronted geese from Greenland to Ireland and the UK. And I got talking to him because I've been reporting white-fronted geese sightings to him. And I mentioned kind of Greenland, and he went, "Oh, yeah. I go up there kind of for a month every year, and I spend my first week hiking." And I went, "Oh, okay." And he said, "Yeah, there's a hiking trail up there, the Arctic Circle Trail, and it gets about, like, you can basically hike it from May up until September, and during that period, I think at its busiest, it gets about 300 people." And I started doing a bit of research on it, and it's 160 kilometers. And it's extremely remote. It's hard to get up there. And when you go up there, if you can do it in 8 days, if you just power through it. But like, you have to carry kind of 8-10 days worth of food with you, all your gear. You're going up there, like, you can go up there and it can be middle of July, but you could still risk getting snow because it's the Arctic. It's 40 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle. So it's up in the tundra, and it's unpredictable kind of weather-wise. So I went there in July of 2017, and I decided as well, kind of at the time, to tie in a bit of fundraising while I was doing it. So I fundraised for Irish Dogs for the Disabled, who are a charity based in Cork. But like, I did it, and I pushed through and did the whole lot in 8 days, and it was fantastic. So that was kind of the start of doing kind of long distance walking projects after that. And I did the first section of the GR10, which is in the Pyrenees, kind of afterwards. And I went back up to Greenland in 2022 because I promised myself, I did it in 8 days the first time. I promised myself I was going to take longer just to, stop and enjoy the scenery and take more photographs and, do a bit of bird watching and wildlife watching when I was there. And I went there in June, which is the end of the Arctic spring. So you get there and the lakes are still frozen over. And on the first 4 days, like all the snow had melted kind of in the lead in towards the mountains. But then I hit the mountains and, there was next thing it was snow up to my knees. And, pushed on and down by one of the fjords where there was still kind of a lot of ice around the place, and had a bad fall, kind of a close one, kind of crossing the ice where it cracked underneath me, and pushed on. And then my last day, I had to go through one of the highest of the passes on the trail, and got up there. And next thing I was in thigh deep, very slushy snow. Went through some ice that I couldn't see while I was probing along, and ended up kind of up as far as kind of mid chest in water, and had to luckily was able to pull myself out. But I'd lost a snowshoe at that point, because my leg twisted underneath me and the snowshoe broke off. And I tried pushing on a bit further and kind of looked at kind of if I couldn't climb up over the mountain, kind of up over the pass on one side and get over it. But without crampons, kind of it was lunacy. I was only begging for a bad injury. So eventually, kind of 9 kilometers from the end, I had to. I always carry a search and rescue beacon with me, so it's a two-way communicator. So I'm able to send text messages home, but also has a search and rescue function, and I always get search and rescue insurance as well. So I had to activate it and call for rescue, and then the Greenlandic Coast Guard flew in and picked me up.
Well worth the insurance.
Oh, well worth the insurance, yeah, absolutely well worth the insurance.
Because I was following you during the summer as well. You were walking down the east coast of America.
October. Yeah, I went over because I've had a project in my mind, and it was going to be a kind of retirement project to walk from coast to coast. So
you're going to walk. And your plan is the East Coast all the way over to the West Coast?
All the way over to the West Coast, yeah. Now, because I work a month on, month off, and having to balance kind of, life as well, and having a life, I'm going to be doing it kind of in stages, kind of going along. It's not, I'd love to be in a position where I could just quit my job and just walk it.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, my bank manager wouldn't be exactly excited about that. So I'm going to do it in increments and head kind of, it could take kind of 18 months, 2 years to do, but, we'll do it kind of as we go along. I do like to keep physically active, and I do like to challenge myself kind of physically as well. I'm happier when I'm training for something. I'm happier when I'm doing planning. Having kind of something there, and even poring over maps. Like half the house is covered in maps. Buy them as a hobby and frame them, or I buy them to look at them, or I'm poring over Google Earth or something like that. So it's looking for stuff like that and looking for a challenge. I won't be the first one to ever walk coast to coast in the US, and won't be the last one either, but it's a personal challenge for me.
I encourage people to follow you on Twitter. I'm just looking here, actually. Your pinned tweet is kinophobia.
Yeah.
A fear that you've lived an ordinary life, and you definitely haven't done that.
Yeah, I kind of haven't managed to do that. I kind of kid myself that I live in Kilkee and I go for a pint to watch the rugby on a Friday evening. And that's kind of my excitement in the week. But then I kind of remind myself I work in conflict zones and do silly things like walk long distances as a hobby.
Is it hard to balance that, like to go from that to then your month off and you're in Kilkee, or do you love that?
Oh no, I love it. Yeah. I love travel. Yeah. I've traveled kind of outside of doing projects and stuff like that. I've seen quite a lot of the world, but in conflict zones. But along with that, kind of, I do love to travel.
And are you in touch much with the guys that you were in the Foreign Legion with?
I actually, the peculiarity of the job that I do is that I actually work with quite a lot of lads that I serve with. I was on a project at one point in Algeria, and there was I was second in charge of security for the project, and then I had there was 22 other guys below me working on different project sites, and out of the 22 guys, there was 18 of them were Irish, and I didn't recruit them. As much as I was accused of stacking the deck with Irish lads, it was actually my boss for the company I worked for in London, who was ex-SAS, who hired them. And as he said, look, I make no bones about it. The Irish fit in everywhere. He said, the Americans love you. The French all think you're mad. The locals always, no matter where you go, you're not English, you're not French, you're not American. The locals all think, Jesus, these Irish lads are different. They're all right. They've fought for independence as well.
Exactly.
So kind of we went anywhere. There was some of these British security firms hired quite heavily in the ex-Legion Irish community.
It's really interesting. Like I have to recommend people to follow you on Dermot Cosgrove, isn't it? At Dermot Cosgrove, to follow you on Twitter. Thank you so much.
No problem, Fergal.
I'd ask you to subscribe or follow wherever you listen to your podcasts, and you'll be the first to know whenever a new episode is coming out. I'd also ask you to follow me on Travel Tales with Fergal on Instagram, and you'll get updates on what's coming next. And if you did enjoy the episode, I'd encourage you to rate and review the episode, as it helps other people to find this series. Take care and safe travels.